Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Deloria, your superintendent. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody that this presentation will be repeated again at 7 o'clock in Spanish. So thank you to all of the parents, caregivers, and students who are logged in for this update this evening. I think it's appropriate to put this in a webinar. I've been communicating with you by memo, but much of this information is better presented in a webinar format. So thank you so much. And let me also say thank you for your responsiveness and ability as our district staff and families manage and maneuver through these very challenging times. So tonight, I'm going to provide updates to you in 3 specific areas. The first area will be on San Mateo's COVID-19 situation. I have data to share with you. The second is the California roadmap on how districts can prepare to return to school in the fall. And finally, I want to give you a very brief fiscal update for the state and for the district. If you have any questions on these 3 topics, please put your question in the chat box. I'm going to stop periodically throughout the webinar, and my associate superintendent, Ms. Karine Baca, will be reading the questions to me. I will attempt to answer. I may not have answers to all of your questions. After the webinar has concluded, we will save the chat and create an FAQ document with your questions and our responses. Again, the presentation tonight is on these 3 topics. If you're looking for information about graduation, remember that I'll be sending out a communication on Friday, May 15th about how we're going to proceed with graduation ceremonies. So first, I want to start out sharing some county information with you. So this is data that is current as of Sunday, and it starts with 2 graphs. The top graph, not a very interesting graph, but it shows the total number of cases. It's cumulative over the past few months and up till May. The bottom graph is the graph that I'm going to be talking to a couple of times this evening during this presentation. And this actually shows you the number of new cases by day. And like I said, I'm going to come back to that graph in a second because our county is going to be relying on this data in terms of order changes for the return to school. But here's what we know is this past Sunday. There were 1,464 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the county. There were 56 deaths, and we currently have 58 patients in the hospital for the virus. We've tested well over 18,000 patients, a little over 1,400 tested positive, and the remaining 16,829 tested negative. There are still 5 results pending, again, as of Sunday. To date, the positive test rate is a little over 8%, and it's taking about a day and a half to get test results. And then looking back at this graph again, I want you to take a look at the bars for the month of May, because one of the things our county health officer has said is that before he eases up on some of the restrictions that would allow schools to return to at-school learning or some form of it, is we have to see 28 days of declining new cases or the same number of cases. So you can see that there isn't any particular pattern here. There's a day where, in May where the count is down, but then the next day it spikes up. And once it spikes up, we had to start that 28-day cycle all over again. So again, this is one of the things I'll talk about here in the presentation. So just quickly, I want to let you know that district superintendents get advice from a lot of people, a lot of guidance. And so I'm not going to read through all these, but nearly every day I get 1 or more emails from all of these groups about guidance on how to do this and how to do that. The 2 important ones are the ones I have highlighted in red. Because we're in a California state of emergency, I have to take direction from the governor. And because the county, San Mateo County, is in a state of emergency, I also have to take the direction of our county health officer, Dr. Morrow. So while there's a lot of conversation, it's these two people, the governor and our county health officer, who I have to listen to. When they direct me, I have to respond accordingly. And our county health officer, Dr. Morrow, has this philosophy. He says, one thing I know is that releasing the restrictions on movement and gatherings too soon or in not an incrementally enough way will diminish the gains we've made and will unleash the very thing we are attempting to avoid. In other words, according to Dr. Morrow, we have a long way to go. There are no quick fixes. So in response to this, I convened a return to school committee. This is a group of people. We have the time. If you remember back in March, we didn't have much time to plan our switch from school learning to at-home learning, but we do have time here. So I have convened a return to school committee. And the purpose of this committee is to research, discuss, and develop a draft return to school plan for this fall. Our first day of school with students is scheduled for August 10th. And there are a number of documents that provide guidance to this committee. The committee is made up of both classified and certificated staff, parents and students, and from all the programs and all the schools in our district. This committee is not only looking at what does school look like for our students and teachers, but it's also talking about how do we bring our employees back from remote working. All of the core areas, math, English, science, social studies, world language, etc., and career technical, English learners, and special education. There'll be representatives from all of these areas. Here's the tough part. They don't have an easy task. I have challenged them to develop a plan that is certainly equitable to all students. We want to make sure all of our students have access to teaching and learning, but it also must be bifurcated. And what I mean by that, the plan has to be nimble enough that on one day we can be in at school learning. And if we have a change in the county order, we can immediately become an at-home learning program virtually overnight. We also have to provide for the basic needs of our students and staff. One thing that became abundantly clear, we had a number of students who were food challenged, and as more and more adults were laid off from work or had to work from home, there were a lot of challenges. So we have to consider, even before we talk about instruction, we have to be thinking about the basic needs of our students and staff. Are they being fed? Do they have access to the internet? Do they have enough devices for everyone at home who needs to use a computer, et cetera? So we have to be thinking about all that. And I would also put in that um, access to wellness services. This committee has to identify metrics that we can easily collect and review so that if we need to make a plan in a change in our plan, we can do that swiftly and based on evidence. The actual work will begin once we have parameters from the governor and Dr. Morrow. And what I mean by that is they've been providing county orders and state orders for a while now. And what are in those orders, as I said earlier, are the ones I have to follow. We're going to talk more about this in just a moment. This committee will be working together for, I would say, 18 to 24 months. Because I think that's how long we're going to be dealing with this emergency. Once they come up with a draft plan, and they may have options as well, the committee is going to seek feedback from staff, from the Board of Education, and myself. So what will school look like? And this is where I'd like to help manage everyone's expectations about our return to school. It's going to be a while before every student and every staff is back on campus without any restrictions. So I want to give you kind of some insight into some of the things we're thinking about. According to experts, it's unlikely that school will return to that normal I just described for at least 18 to 24 months. This is what we should all expect. There'll be some sort of staggered schedule or adjusted hours for the next school year. So for 2020, 2021, next school year, there'll be some kind of a staggered schedule or adjusted hours. We can also expect some kind of combination of at school and at home learning. So the distance learning will not go away. Large group events, and I have large in quotes because the size of the group gets determined by the county health officer. Right now, a group can't be larger than 9. So large group events are unlikely for the next 12 to 18 months. And adults and students will be wearing masks at school. Right now, the county officer is thinking about class sizes of 12 to 16 students. And let's assume it's 16. That would mean students would have to be clustered in groups of 4 and spaced out in a classroom to honor the social distance order. Currently, that's at 6 feet. We need to prepare for brief school closures. So it's completely likely that in the fall, we'll have a surge again. And if there are enough cases and contacts at a school, we may need to briefly close a school so we have enough time to disinfect well and to follow up on all of the cases and contacts as will be required by the health department. So I'm quite sure there are going to be times when an individual school or a couple of schools will have to close briefly, which means going to distance learning. Understand that staff, including myself, we cannot release the name or identifying information about adults or students who either test positive for COVID-19 or who have been in contact with that. I know that's something that was a challenge early on in March when there'd be rumors that somebody had been in contact with someone who might have COVID-19 and people would want to know those names. Legally, we're not allowed to share that information. So Ms. Baca, I'm going to pause and see if you have any clarifying questions on the San Mateo County update.
Yes. A question is, will there be any sports team for the 2021 school year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, what's going to happen with sports next year? Actually, CIF at the state level is monitoring this situation. And again, they have to do the same thing. They have to follow what happens from the governor, and then each of the individual counties have their own county orders. So right now, what I can say is we don't have any fall sports practice schedules in place. We're not expecting any kind of practice over the summertime. And then we'll be looking for some guidance from the county health department in terms of if we could return to some kind of fall sports, what would that look like? I will share with you, though, that one of the state commissioners, CIF commissioners, shared it's possible that fall sports like football would be delayed to another part of the school year. So that was a great question. Do you have another one, Ms. Baca?
Yes, we have a few. How do you determine which students will be able to return to school that will be social distancing?
Now that is the hard part. So the question is, how do you decide which students are coming to school? Well, technically all of our students would be coming to school unless, of course, they're sick, then they're not going to come to school. And there will probably be some direction from the health department on assessing students and adults when they come onto campus. But the trouble is we can't have, if a teacher can only have 12 to 16 students at a time, at 16 students, that means about half of a campus can be at school. And if it's at 12, that's about a third. So what makes this really challenging is how do you have some students at school and some students at home? And I don't have an answer to that yet. There are a lot of documents that talk about staggering schedules, but we also aren't going to be able to hire more teachers, and we're not going to ask teachers to work more than their typical school day. So that's when I'm talking about a staggered schedule. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen, but it could be that if you divide the student body into thirds somehow, if it's 12 to 1, then a third would come on one day, a different third on a second day, and a different third on the third day. What makes that really challenging in a high school district is students don't sign up for their 6 classes in these really neat cohorts. In elementary school, you have a first grade teacher or third grade teacher, and they have 20 or 30 some students, and they have the same students all day long. And those students have the same content material all day long. So imagine students in high school who could be in any number of different math classes. So we could have a ninth grader who's in ninth grade English, but they are not in the same math class as the rest of the freshmen. Some of them might be taking a world language. Some of them might be taking a CTE course. Some of our students are in special education. Some of them are English learners. So what makes this challenging is how do you sort those students into who's coming to school? The other thing that's really, really challenging is we have families who have students in more than one district. So if we have a family who has a student that attends Jefferson High School, but also goes to Policeta Middle School at Jefferson, how do we coordinate that so there isn't an additional burden on families that either you have the younger kids at home and the older kids are home on a different day? So it's a very complicated situation. There are some districts that have already decided down south that they're going to stay with distance learning for a while because they're not sure how they're going to figure it out, but we're going to try. So I know that was a long explanation, but it was an excellent question.
Okay, we have a lot of questions, but I'm only going to take 2 of the many questions that we have. But what we're going to do is take these questions and we will answer them and post them afterwards. So the next question is it possible that the courses will be standardized across the state, possibly a general online course that all students will take rather than each teacher uploading their curriculum?
Yeah, that's a good question. And while that sounds logical, at the state level, our Department of Education and our state Department of Education, um, Board of Education, they don't dictate to local school districts. So local school districts have control in terms of the curriculum that they offer. And I'll be honest with you, the guidance that we get from the state and from the government is usually insufficient for my team and I to make decisions. I participated in a webinar with Jackie Spear, who said our best chance is to work with our local resources to have a successful outcome. So very unlikely that the state would make a decision that all students are going to take exactly the same curriculum.
Okay, will there be face masks provided?
Yes, in fact, a couple of things. Our county office is going to stockpile masks so that, in other words, order them at a huge discount so that we districts can buy them from the county. Um, this is even this part is challenging because if you think about think of parents, I'm asking you to think about this. We have about 4,500 students in our district and another about 500 staff. So wouldn't it be great if we could just give everybody a mask on day one and we didn't have to worry about that? The masks that we're going to get are probably going to be the disposable kind, and the disposable ones were not really designed to spray disinfectant on and to wear over and over and over again. So if you think about even 4,500 masks, how many students think won't have their own or will forget to bring one, etc. I'm thinking about my own son. I could give him a mask at 9 o'clock in the morning, and by noon he'll lose his mask. Um, So this is a challenge, but yeah, the district is going to provide those masks, obviously, to the extent that families can, if they can get their hands on fabric masks that can be washed and reused, that would be really helpful to the district. So great question.
Okay, last one, and then we'll move on. What date do students start the at-school learning?
So we don't have a date. We have a date for the first day of school, which is scheduled to be August. But what I can't tell you is what school is going to look like that day. We don't have enough information from our county health officer, and our return to school committee just had their orientation meeting next week. But I promise you that as they start to make progress, I will be communicating with you, as I have been, through communications, my memos, and I can let you know how we're making progress.
And we can go ahead and we will answer some more of these questions in a little bit.
You want me to move on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the next part of the presentation has to do with budget. I'm sure that if you've been following the news at all, you know that California, and indeed the country, is spending a lot of money in response to our current emergency. So there has been additional funding that's been given to our district, and I want to share that with you. At the federal level, our district was allocated $354,136 through the CARES Act. And this is money that's coming directly to districts, and it's to be used for emergency response. That federal money also gave money over to the governors. And so Governor Newsom has about $320 million that he can share, or he needs to share, with school districts. Now, $320 million sounds like a lot of money. He can keep up to 10% of it. And we have nearly 1,000 school districts in California. So it'll be nice to get something, but it's not a lot of money. So not a lot of relief there from the federal. At the state level, SB 117, early on in March, provided our district about $71,000, which we spent very quickly. We spent it very quickly just serving additional meals to children. We're serving more meals now daily and weekly than we were during the regular school year. So that $71,000 went pretty quickly. At the county level, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation allocated $800,000 to the school districts in San Mateo County. And what we had to do is we had to apply for that money through a competitive process. Again, $800,000 over 23 districts isn't a lot of money, but I know that we have needs to feed students over the summer, breakfasts and lunches over the summer. So I did submit an application for $70,000 to help with our food costs over the summertime. I don't know that I'll get the $70,000. Again, they're trying to be equitable, making sure all districts get something, but I did apply for that. And then locally, we have a small committee of staff who put together a plan to fundraise and provide emergency relief services to students and families within our district who needed it. They have collected over $39,000 and are slowly getting services out to the families that have requested assistance and for whom have been assessed by our staff. And so those services could be for food relief, it could be for medication, in some cases it's feminine hygiene products or baby products, even pet food, so that they don't have to return their pets to the shelter. So this is kind of the money that we've received so far. In terms of the California budget, and everything I present to you comes from a published source. I don't necessarily put all the sources here, but I'm not I'm not providing you with any fake news. I'm giving you truth here. So superintendents were told to expect a pandemic-induced recession, the same as or maybe worse than the recession we had in 2008, which doesn't seem very long ago. The governor recently updated his outlook and said that he expects California to be short by $54 billion for the 2021 school year. That is a lot of money. And this is because of the shelter in place across the state, tax revenues, including sales tax, is way, way down. This is going to be equivalent to about an $18 billion shortfall to public schools, which different sources have equated to 20% cuts and or deferrals. And so I think everyone understands what a cut is, but a deferral is a technique that an agency can use if a budget year ends on June 30th. A deferral means that money you would have gotten in that year would be deferred until July 1st. So you get the money, but not until the next budget year. John Gray, who is the CEO for School Services of California, this is a group that all districts rely on for financial information and guidance. He says cuts for districts will be painful. And then remember that rainy day fund that former Governor Brown put about $20 billion in that fund. It can't all be used in 1 year. And according to the governor, it will be completely gone in 3 years. So we're $54 billion short for next year, and we'll get a portion of that $20 billion to help, but you can see there's still a considerable shortfall. So how does this relate to our district budget? So our district income will be impacted. Since March, we haven't been collecting any kind of rental income. As you know, the district office and each of the schools rent out facilities. We won't be receiving any of that money. Money that we get from the state for special programs, special education, career technical education, and our lottery money will likely be substantially reduced. In the past, our lottery money, it's not a lot of money, but our lottery money in the past has not been withheld from us. So this is something new with this potential budget crisis. And then the state has grants that they put out. Districts apply for the grants and either they get an award or they don't. And so the state has told us already that if we were awarded a grant, if we already have the money, we get to keep that money. But if we haven't been apportioned that money, likely we won't be getting that money. So that's something we're going to have to watch because our district does receive income from a couple of grants. And then as the financial impacts of this pandemic are fully realized, income from property taxes will likely decrease. I will say that I feel comfortable in saying, 100% comfortable in saying we are not considering any layoffs for next school year. I can't say anything for the year after, but for next year, we have no intentions of laying off any staff. So spending, we will have to reduce our spending in our district. And I think there are some things that we can do that will keep those cuts away from classrooms. We're going to form a budget committee to identify areas for savings and areas for increasing our revenue to ensure our district is in the best possible position to weather the upcoming financial impacts. And let me stop there. And Ms. Baca, do you have any clarifying questions on the district budget?
There are a lot of questions that I want to go back, but you can continue and we will ask you, give you the questions in a little bit.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, did you say, because I'm at the end of the presentation.
Oh, you're at, okay. So can you just please clarify when the first day of school is?
Okay, right now, our negotiated first day of school for students is August 10th. And I know that the governor made a comment several weeks ago that schools could start early in July. We'll still be in some form of summer school in July. And calendar dates are negotiated items. And we worked with labor on our August 10th start time. So I wouldn't anticipate it happening before August 10th. And then what actually looks like on that first day is yet to be determined.
Okay, thank you. At-home learning seems to have made equity problems much worse. What have we learned that we can use in the 2021 school year to do better?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. If you remember, on March 13th, Friday, March 13th was the last day of at-school learning. And we sent the students home. We notified you like Sunday evening that kids would not be returning to school, and that following Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, leaders and staff did planning around distance learning. At that time, we thought that was going to be a temporary situation for a period of 2 or 3 weeks. We were hoping we could ride out until spring break this remote learning. After spring break, it became more and more clear that we were going to be in distance learning for a long time, and as it turned out, it was for the rest of the semester. So one of the things we learned so much, and I'm probably not going to remember everything, but we obviously knew in the beginning that not every household had the internet or a robust enough access to the internet that would allow for parents who had to work from home, for multiple siblings to be on devices and be online. So the internet connectivity was an issue. We were able to get hotspots deployed out to families, but again, the how responsive and how the quality of those hotspots are not what I have personally in my own home. So that's an issue that our technology department is working with. It's something that our superintendent of public instruction for the state of California, Tony Thurman, is working on. And it's something that even at the federal level, they're taking a look at. What can we do? At this point, having having internet at home is like a basic service. If you remember in the 80s, policy made a decision that everybody should have a telephone at home. And for those who couldn't afford it, they made sure people had access. So I think we're going to see something in the future about that. So internet access and the quality of internet was one lesson learned. Another lesson learned is families might have had one or two devices at home, but again, when more and more parents were working from home, when you have more than one child who had to work remotely, um, in many cases, we were lending out devices to students, not because there wasn't a device at home, but there weren't enough devices at home. And then making sure that the devices were actually usable. So that was something that we learned. We also learned that from a staff perspective, um, we actually had staff who weren't able to get internet because they lived in remote areas or areas where the internet was unreliable. We also had staff who didn't have devices at home because they came to school and that's where all the technology was. We learned that, and we knew this, we knew that students with disabilities, um, their ability to learn content, doing it through distance learning wasn't always the way to learn the content. Sometimes it wasn't appropriate. We had issues with, especially our newcomers, our English learners who were new to English. Sometimes the distance learning wasn't the best way to acquire language. Um, we know that distance learning, and you've heard about the colleges all going to distance learning. I don't think we're ever going to be a place in public education that we're going to completely substitute digital methods. I think there's no substitution for contact with human beings. I think one of our biggest challenges was figuring out how to connect students and adults in a healthy, meaningful way. And that is something when I talked earlier in the presentation about making sure we're meeting the needs of students, understanding that um, students have more on their plate than just their 6 subjects. There are things happening at home. Parents are working remotely, or maybe parents are laid off. Younger kids are at home. Sometimes the teenagers had to go to work during the day. I mean, there were a lot of things, just the stress of not seeing your friends and the teachers that that was building on students. So that's it's not that it's a lesson learned. I think we all expected that, but I don't think any of us expected we'd be doing this for the length of time that we have been doing it. And the toll on students, staff, and families' wellness has certainly been larger than I could have anticipated. And that's something we're going to have to be thinking about on our return to school committee. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer. And there are more lessons learned, but the inequities, I am really concerned about the inequities.
Will there be any changes to the SAT for juniors in 2021?
So the College Board is working on a way that students can access the SAT online. I haven't, you can click in the parent communications. I think I still have a College Board website. And so parents and students of juniors, this year's juniors or even 10th graders, you might want to take a look at that College Board link again. They have a plan for some kind of distance testing. And I think they canceled the June test dates. But we can research that and put a link in our Q&A document.
How were the parents selected for the committee?
So what I did is I reached out to some parents who I know have children in multiple districts. So that's how I did that one.
Why even attempt going back to school if there are restrictions and risks? Why not continue AHL?
Well, I think that if we can return to school, we should. I think it's in the best interest from a wellness perspective, students to get to some kind of routine so they can see their friends, so they can see teachers. And like I said, there's going to be no substitute for the physical connection of seeing your teachers at school. I think we need to do that. There's no doubt there are risks, and there are a lot of restrictions in place. I would say in terms of the risks, um, if anybody has any concerns at all, you should always consult with your physician, especially if students or family members have any kind of health issues. Certainly, I'm not a doctor at all, so you want to be working with your doctors. There are districts, though, who've made that decision to start the school year that way. I'm hoping that we don't have to do that. I'm hoping that there'll be enough change in the county health orders, and that the return to school committee conditions so that we're not doing everything at home. The at-home learning, while I'm really proud of staff, I'm proud of students, I'm proud of families for responding to the plan, it's still not a perfect solution. Um, and we're going to need to continue honing and improving our distance learning because it's going to be with us for a while.
So how do we plan to serve students with IEPs and provide equitable learning support?
Yes, that's a really good question. My middle daughter had an IEP when she was in high school, and I too would be asking that question. Um, Certainly, we have to follow our IEPs to the extent that we can. I'm hoping that we'll get some guidance from the federal government on this. There hasn't been much guidance from the state level on that. But if we can get to some system where we're at school and at home, we can better meet the needs of our students with IEPs. And I would say our English learners as well. I don't have an answer for that. A lot of that is IEP driven, but it is a priority, and there'll be a small subcommittee on the return to school committee who will be thinking about those kinds of questions.
Why aren't teachers teaching via Zoom video? Other schools and colleges are doing that as if they were in classroom and all students are at home.
So we have a wide range of teaching strategies. Keep in mind, on March 13th, none of our teachers In fact, I would say very few of the administrators had ever been trained in how to provide distance instruction or instruction through distance learning. And we didn't have any of the tools that help facilitate that. So since March 13th, our director of curriculum instruction, our soon to be Dr. Lori Robinson, did a lot of training. And first it started with how to use Google Classroom as a way to organize content and communications. We found out another lesson learned was the extent to which teachers could communicate through Google Classroom helped students because they were getting emails from multiple teachers and couldn't keep track of everything that was coming into them. So we originally started with Google Classroom, and probably about a fourth of our staff was already familiar with Google Classroom, but then all the other Google documents, all the other Google tools as well, including our Google Meeting. And then when we didn't have a subscription to the Zoom suite, and when Zoom made that available free to school districts, and they started to put in some safety features, we started to train our teachers, not me, I didn't do that, but Dr. Robinson and instructional coaches did that, started to provide more training to teachers. And there was a list of other distance learning applications that were shared with teachers. But keep in mind, they were still trying to teach students while they were learning how to do this through distance learning. So in the beginning, we had far more teachers who were just assigning what I would say is packet work or worksheets. And slowly, over the course of these past 8 weeks, we have teachers who are actually doing what we call synchronous teaching, where you can log in and the class is together and the teacher is actually doing instruction online. In some cases, there are whiteboards and teachers are doing examples on whiteboards and other kinds of technology. Some teachers are working through classrooms, some are using Google Meet, some are using Zoom. And then we still have teachers as well who are assigning things in terms of paper packets and everything in between. And so um, it was a big lift. And I'm proud of our staff to be able to do that while at the same time be teaching students.
Can you please elaborate more on the clusters of 4 in the classroom setup?
So that was a hypothetical. And I was the current student to teacher ratio that can be used for childcare. So there's a county order that allows for the childcare of emergency workers. And there's guidelines for that. So as you know, schools, we can't have our students at schools, but for those daycares or childcare agencies who are providing childcare to our emergency workers, nurses, police officers, etc. The ratio was 12 students to 1 adult. And that was given their age of 3 to 5, and there might have been some different guidelines for children younger than 3. So we're using that 12-to-1 ratio because we don't have anything else to work with right now. But if Dr. Morrow increased that to 16-to-1, you still have to physically distance students in a classroom. And so a classroom is a little shy of 1,000 square feet. And so what you would virtually have to do is we could group those students in fours. That would be if the county order allowed us to put 4 students together, they would be together in one portion of the classroom and then 3 other class spaced out. And then those students, the 16 in that classroom would have to be the same 16 every time they meet with the teacher. And those clusters of 4 would have to be the same clusters of 4. And that's if Dr. Morrow says 16-to-1. And I don't know what he's going to say, but that was just a description of what a classroom might look like. And the problem is not all classrooms are about 1,000 square feet. So there are some classrooms that are smaller than that. So that number of students would have to come down.
Will there be testing for all students to check for what they call super spreader asymptomatic people? And will all temperatures be taken?
Yeah, I can't speak to that at this time. I know that a lot of businesses are requiring all of their employees to go through a health screening, including a temperature every time they come to work. Um, I can't speak to that. That's something that would come in a county order. Part of that is how, so imagine again, imagine that we have, I'm going to use Westmore as an example. Half of those students, say 700 of those students, 750 of those students were coming to school. How would we socially distance them so that we can take their temperature and do the health screening every day? I'm not saying it's impossible, and there may be some tools that help us with that, but I'll be looking for direction from Dr. Morrow on that one. Excellent question, and we are thinking of that as well.
Will summer school be available?
So summer school is available. It's really designed this year for those students who are credit deficient, for English learners, for students who have IEPs, and also for those students who receive a no mark. So if a student received a no mark grade, for example, in Spanish 1, maybe math, maybe I should say math. If they have a no mark in math course 1, it would be possible for them to take it in the summertime and pass it so they can continue on with the math in the fall. So families should have already received communication on summer school. It will be by distance learning, by the way.
What happens to community hours moving forward?
I don't understand what, do you
That
understand
might
what
be
they
for
mean?
Oceana's requirement.
Okay, if we're talking about community service, that's a decision that's made by the academic council at Oceana. I know that they made an accommodation for this year's seniors and reduced those total hours from 100 to 50, but I'm not sure. I will say that there are representatives from Oceana, including the principal, on our return to school committee, and that'll be one of the things they'll have to consider.
We got a few questions about the start of the school again. Just if you just please clarify when it is, you said it's starting July, still a possibility. That was the question, and several questions are like that.
Yeah. So let me reiterate. The first day of school, or the school calendar for when children have to arrive, that is a negotiated item with our labor association. And so our first day of school with students is scheduled for August 10th. I don't know what school will look like on that day, but that's the first day of school. The governor some weeks ago made a comment that schools could start early in July. That would not work for our high school district because we're still in summer school at that time. And like I said, the first date of school has already been negotiated to be August 10th.
Okay, a few more questions. So a daughter is high risk for getting the virus due to chronic asthma. She does not want her daughter risk going to school and getting sick. Can she be excused from going to school physically and continue her at-home learning?
So that is one of the things that the Return to School Committee will have to consider of learning programs for students who are health impaired and can't return to that environment. So I don't have an answer for that, but that's something the Return to School Committee will be considering.
Would we consider installing more hand sanitizing stations or have them available at the school for students and staff to use?
Yeah, so even before we went to at-home learning, we had the disinfectant stations. We made sure that there was one in every classroom across the district and in those high use areas as well. So those are already there. We had enough sanitizer. So you can imagine when we get back to school, we're going to have to um, bring back that whole campaign about washing your hands, using the disinfectant, all that kind of stuff. But good question. We do have all those. The question is making sure we have enough of the disinfectant to keep them all full.
Um, I am very pleased that there won't be any layoffs in 2021. How will we manage that?
So one of the nice things about our district is, well, there are many nice things about our district, but we're no longer an LCFF district. What I mean by that is we've been kind of toggling back and forth between a district that is community funded, a a district that is state funded. And so if you remember some of you may remember Miss Van Rapphorst's presentations where she showed the buckets. We collect enough tax revenue locally that we don't rely on the state for our LCFF allocation. So in terms of our funding for next year, um, I feel confident that we can keep all of our staff. The problem's going to be in terms of future years, if there's a change in what the rate of increase is in our property taxes, if it doesn't keep up with the costs of living and the other costs in our district, we also don't have a safety net. So we're going to be affected next year by some state cuts. We have a little bit of cushion with our reserve, but as we move away from next school year, we do have to look very carefully at how we can start saving money. We need to be looking for ways to cut that doesn't impact the classroom and ways to bring in more revenue for the district.
Okay, would grading be different in the fall too?
I'm sorry, you bleeped out for a second. Can you repeat the
I'm sorry.
question?
Would grading be different in the fall?
Yeah, I can't speak to the grading at this point. I think it all depends on our return to school model and the extent to which we're actually able to be in school with students in front of teachers. So I can't comment yet at this time on grading.
Okay, and if you could end with just the graduation status, and then again, we will take these questions and answer them and send them to families after this question about graduation.
Okay. And before I answer, let me just say thank you to everybody who participated tonight. I know your lives are busy. You're trying to manage this crisis and working and everything else. So I thank you so much for making time to sit and listen to me tonight. I am meeting with principals tomorrow. We're going to discuss the recent health order that was released, and I expect to have a decision out to seniors and their families sometime on Friday in terms of what we're going to do for graduation. And that is all. Remember that at 7 o'clock, we will also do this presentation in Spanish. Thank you, everybody. Be safe.